I stood frozen in my slippers, bathrobe flapping in the wind, as a cement mixer rumbled backward into my backyard like it was on a mission from a villain movie. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't hallucinating. I was watching, in real time, as a stream of thick gray concrete gushed out of the chute directly into my 140-year-old historic well, the same well I had spent the last year restoring by hand, stone by stone. And standing triumphantly beside the truck in leopard-print yoga pants and a wide-brimmed sun hat was Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA, waving a clipboard like a sword and yelling, "This is for neighborhood uniformity." The truck beeped. My jaw dropped. And my wife, Dana, who had only come out to water the basil, dropped her watering can like she was watching someone torch our home. That's when I realized I wasn't just in a war over water. I was in a war with a lunatic HOA president who had no idea that she had just declared battle against the one man in the neighborhood with full land rights over her water supply. It had started simply enough. We moved into the neighborhood on the edge of the city's historical zone, hoping for peace and space to breathe. The property was old, charming, and had something very few homes in the HOA could boast: a fully functioning, municipally approved, hand-dug well. While most residents had to rely on overpriced HOA-controlled utility contracts with a notorious water markup, Dana and I used our private well, legally permitted, beautifully maintained, and blessed by the Historical Society. That well was more than just a water source. It was a symbol of independence, of everything we wanted this house to be, free from petty control. Karen, of course, hated it. From the moment she saw the renovation plans tacked on our porch, she began her campaign. First came the complaint. The well violates neighborhood aesthetic rules. The brick color isn't compliant. The pulley is too visible from the street. Then came the citations, each one more laughable than the last. We appealed. We won. Every single time. But Karen didn't take defeat like a normal person. No, Karen doubled down like she was trying to win a war no one else even knew they were in. Her last email before the cement truck incident had ended with the phrase, "Consider this your final notice before community action is taken." We'd laugh. What kind of action could she take? We had permits. We had legal counsel. And we had history on our side. Apparently, we also needed a security camera pointed directly at our water source. The morning it happened was supposed to be quiet. I had just sat down with my coffee and a book when I heard the unnatural growl of diesel in the backyard. The mixer was already backing in. I didn't even have time to put on shoes. By the time I reached them, the well was 3/4 full, bubbling gray at the edges. Karen was already turning to leave, her clip-on sunglasses shining like the smugness in her voice. I hollered, "What are you doing? Are you insane? That's a protected structure." She didn't even flinch. She just called over her shoulder, "You're welcome. Now maybe your eyesore won't hurt our property values." Dana stood beside me, completely stunned, mouth agape. She's a former city infrastructure engineer, and had worked on everything from sewer systems to utility grid. Her first instinct wasn't rage. It was logistics. Her eyes narrowed as she muttered, "She just messed with the wrong part of the map." I tried calling the police. Vandalism of a historic structure. Environmental contamination. Trespassing. But the HOA lawyer had already called it a community-led maintenance operation. The city said it was a civil matter. Karen, unsurprisingly, claimed she had multiple HOA board votes and community consent. Consent, apparently, meant 3 signatures gathered over mimosas in her backyard. We spent the rest of the day documenting everything. Photos, video, cement truck license plate, witness statements. Our neighbor Greg, who had walked over to borrow a shovel, stood dumbfounded watching the mess unfold and simply said, "I always thought that lady was a menace, but this is sociopathic." Dana was already flipping through her old files before I even had a chance to finish my coffee. She pulled out a binder labeled easement contracts and thumbed through it like she was on a mission. What she found changed everything. Back when the land was sold to developers decades ago, The builder had agreed to several conditions. One of those was that water access for the surrounding area passed through a master underground conduit buried under our property. The contract, a boring but legally binding piece of paper, stated that should the landowner ever choose to revoke access to that underground pathway, the water company was required to cease all neighborhood water delivery until the matter was resolved in court. It was a provision put in place to protect the original landowner's rights, and that landowner's descendant, as it turns out, was me. Suddenly, I didn't feel helpless anymore. Karen had played her hand with cement, but we held the valve that controlled her neighborhood's lifeline. I called an old friend who worked in municipal contracts. After some back and forth and an emailed copy of the original agreement, he called me back, whistling low. "You're not going to believe this, Ray. That easement is active. If you file a revocation, the city is legally required to shut off water delivery to every house in the subdivision until it's either reinstated or they reroute, which could take months and a fat budget they don't have." That's when I felt it. That subtle shift from victim to chess player. Karen had brought cement to a contract war, and we were holding the pen. Dana grinned like she just remembered how much she enjoyed strategic planning. "We'll file the revocation, but we'll give them 48 hours first. Let's see if they're smart enough to fix this before they're brushing their teeth with bottled water." And so, that night, while the HOA gathered around their clubhouse to toast another successful enforcement operation, I sent one email to the city's Water Administration Office, CC'd to the HOA board. It was short, polite, and very, very clear. Due to unauthorized damage to protected private infrastructure, we are suspending the landowner easement permitting water access through our property. Per agreement #872L, delivery must cease effective 48 hours from this notice until further legal resolution. Thank you for your cooperation. 2 days. That's all they had. 2 days before Karen's empire turned into a desert. And as I sat on my porch, sipping fresh water from the last draw of our well's emergency reserve, I watched her smug little crew wave goodbye to the cement truck like heroes. They had no idea what was coming. But oh, they would. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the neighborhood was already buzzing, but not for the reasons Karen had hoped. Word spread fast that the HOA had handled the historic well behind our house, and a few overly enthusiastic board members were walking around like they'd just defeated some invading army. One of them, a guy named Philip who wore HOA logo polos like a uniform, was even going door to door reminding people to thank the board for upholding community aesthetics. But what no one realized was that the countdown had already started. 48 hours until the faucets dried up. 2 days before their beautifully watered lawns became brittle yellow patches under the summer sun. And as Dana and I sat down with our coffee, she pulled up a digital copy of the original water line blueprint and highlighted the part that made this entire situation possible. The HOA's water contract was dependent on a century-old pipeline that ran under our property, buried deep but never rerouted. They built around us, not realizing the pressure point we had the power to pinch close. I spent the morning printing off the easement agreement, blowing up specific sections in bold for maximum effect, and preparing my folders. Dana had already mapped out the valve control point. It wasn't some old rusty wheel hidden in a shed. It was a locked utility panel in our backyard disguised as a harmless maintenance box, which we had restored just last year. The panel gave us legal access to control flow, because the original contract never accounted for an HOA acting like a cartel. While I drafted our formal letter to the city, Dana worked her side of the plan. She knew most of the people in the water regulation office, having worked under the same department 5 years earlier. Her former boss, Martin, picked up the phone after one ring. Dana explained what had happened, and Martin let out a low whistle followed by a stunned laugh. "Wait, they cemented your well? As in, they trespassed and dumped concrete into an approved historical structure?" Dana confirmed, "Yes, that's exactly what they did." Martin didn't even hesitate. "If you're invoking the easement clause, we'll need it in writing. but I'll get the infrastructure inspector over there today. You still have that panel secured, right? Dana assured him we did. And he responded, good. Because if they touch it, it becomes a criminal matter. Property access control is no joke. By noon, an unmarked city vehicle pulled up in front of our driveway. A young inspector stepped out, clipboard in hand, and walked directly to the utility panel. After inspecting it and verifying the serial number, he nodded at Dana and gave her a small card. When you send the revocation notice, CC this office. We'll take care of the pipeline shutoff on our end. Legally, we have to honor it. Tat valve still yours. Later that afternoon, as I stood outside watering the shrubs with what was left of our emergency well supply, Karen strutted down the sidewalk like she was walking a red carpet. She paused right in front of me, sunglasses low on her nose, and smiled like she'd won some imaginary prize. See? Doesn't the yard look cleaner without that dreadful old well in the middle of it? I didn't even flinch. I just smiled and nodded. Karen, it's amazing how fast things change around here. She raised an eyebrow, confused by my calm tone. But instead of staying to argue, she flicked her wrist and marched off, clearly expecting me to boil with rage. The truth was, I wasn't mad anymore. I was patient. Because revenge wasn't about shouting or filing complaints. It was about knowing exactly how and when to apply pressure. And now we had the valve. That night, Dana and I finalized our revocation document. We cited the contract clause, included 3 photos of the vandalized well, 2 videos of the cement truck backing onto our property, and a notarized letter from a neighbor confirming what he witnessed. The last page was the legal easement control declaration signed by my great-uncle decades ago. I CC'd the water department, the HOA's own legal email, and Karen's personal inbox. At precisely 8 p.m., I clicked send. The next day was quiet, eerily so. There were no messages, no door knocks, no calls from the HOA. I figured they were scrambling behind closed doors, trying to decipher the document, probably calling emergency meetings. At 7 a.m. the following morning, I walked out with a fresh cup of coffee and sat on our porch, watching. At 7:15 it started. The first scream came from 2 houses down. The sprinklers didn't come on. 5 minutes later, someone banged on their hose bib, clearly trying to get it to work. At 7:30 the neighborhood group chat lit up. Is the water pressure low for anyone else? My shower is just dripping. No water. What's going on? Did the HOA forget to pay the city? Karen, what the hell is happening? By 8 a.m., full panic mode had set in. Karen posted an official HOA announcement in the group chat. Due to an unexpected municipal maintenance issue, water service will be temporarily limited. Please conserve usage until resolved. We appreciate your understanding. I almost choked on my coffee. Unexpected municipal maintenance? That's one way to put it. Dana simply laughed, scrolling through the comments. Within 10 minutes, the residents were demanding an explanation, accusing the HOA of mismanagement, and begging for bottled water deliveries. Some older residents were calling for emergency utility crews. One neighbor, Tim, wrote, "I have a 3-year-old and no running toilet. This is a health issue now." Around 10 a.m., Karen showed up at our property. She didn't knock. She shouted from the sidewalk. "Ray, I know what you did." I stepped out calmly, hands in my pockets. "Oh, I haven't even done anything. All I did was follow the terms of a legal agreement that your little cement stunt violated. You cut off our water supply. We just returned the favor." Her face turned red. "You can't do that. You don't have the authority." I shrugged and said, "Actually, I do. And if you'd bothered to read the contract before marching that truck into my yard, you'd know that too." She sputtered for a few seconds before storming off without another word. By midday, the HOA held an emergency board meeting. But this time, it wasn't behind closed doors. Word had spread, and half the neighborhood showed up outside the clubhouse demanding answers. I watched from my drone, which I flew casually over the clubhouse parking lot, feeding footage back to my laptop. Dana sipped her iced tea as we watched board members argue. One of them, a younger guy named Thomas, even slammed a binder on the table and yelled, "You didn't tell us there was a contract involved. You told us he was violating aesthetic codes." Karen barked something back, but it was lost in the noise. People were yelling. Someone shouted, "This is illegal. You cemented his private well." Meanwhile, a city official quietly stepped into the building, holding a clipboard. From the drone's camera, we watched him pull Karen aside. She looked stunned, then panicked, then furious. I paused the footage right there, zoomed in on her face. The kind of face someone makes when they realize they've stepped into a bear trap, set by themselves. Dana tilted her head and said, "Think we should give them an out?" I shook my head. "Not yet. Let it simmer. We haven't even gotten to the good part. The real fun begins when the toilets stop flushing." The next 48 hours unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. The kind where everyone sees the disaster coming but no one knows how to stop it. The HOA members tried to project calm, but their carefully crafted image was crumbling faster than a sandcastle in a monsoon. It began with minor grumbling. Children complaining they couldn't fill their inflatable pools, gardeners shouting about withering flower beds, dogs whining for their water bowls. But by day 2, the murmurs had become a neighborhood-wide roar. Faucets were coughing air. Water coolers were flying off store shelves. Karen's grand solution? An emergency memo sent to all residents at 2 a.m. suggesting everyone boil collected rainwater and practice water use mindfulness. Unsurprisingly, the residents were not thrilled about her hippie cult approach to basic utilities. Meanwhile, Dana and I observed everything like generals from a hilltop watching the enemy's camp disintegrate. Our own water supply was still intact, albeit limited, given the damage to our well, but we had enough reserves, portable tanks, and a private filtration setup to stay comfortable. We didn't flaunt it. At least, not at first. That changed when Karen accused us in a community post of hoarding water and profiting off neighborhood suffering. That's when Dana smiled, cracked her knuckles, and said, "Fine. Let's test how much they really need us." So we set up a little table near our driveway, just inside the fence. On it sat a small water cooler filled from our last functional draw, a stack of recyclable paper cups, and a handwritten sign, "Fresh well water, free for non-HOA members." The message was clear. The board had made this mess. But the neighbors? They still had a chance to drink with dignity. Within minutes, we had a line. Elderly residents showed up with empty jugs. Families brought their kids just for a sip. One man brought his dog. We offered them smiles and cold water. No lectures. No politics. Just kindness. And the effect was instant. People began murmuring, not about us, but about Karen. Questions flew like wildfire. Why was the HOA so obsessed with the well? Why would they destroy something that didn't cost them a dime? What kind of neighborhood punishes self-sufficiency? One neighbor, Sarah, stood there sipping her water and said loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear, "I used to think Ray was just eccentric. Now I think he's the only sane person in this place." By mid-afternoon, Karen stormed over, practically frothing at the mouth. She demanded I stop the unauthorized distribution of water. I calmly pointed out that, unlike her, I had not destroyed anyone's property or endangered public health. She pointed a trembling finger at the sign and snapped, "You're manipulating the community." I replied, "No, Karen, I'm hydrating them. There's a difference." A crowd had gathered by then, watching like they were at a courtroom drama. Someone in the back even whispered, "Objection, Karen. Sit down." I almost laughed. Still, Karen wasn't done. That evening, she tried a more official route. She filed a formal complaint with the city's zoning board, claiming I was running an unlicensed water distribution center. But Dana had anticipated this. The form she had printed the week prior, labeled Personal Emergency Relief Distribution Exception, had already been submitted. The zoning officer called me personally to chuckle. "Looks like she's fishing for ways to stay relevant. Don't worry, you're covered." That night, Dana showed me the neighborhood chat logs. Residents were revolting. Screenshots showed people calling for an emergency HOA meeting, some even organizing a petition to recall the entire board. A few brave souls went door to door collecting signatures. One particularly determined neighbor taped a sign to her mailbox. "I support water rights." Karen was unraveling. Her carefully curated control of the neighborhood was slipping. She tried to release a video to calm everyone down. It was supposed to be a professional statement but ended up as a PR disaster. In the middle of her rehearsed speech, her lawn sprinklers suddenly choked and died on camera. The background faded from green to brown in real time. But worse was the hot mic moment at the end. As she stormed off camera, thinking the recording had ended, she muttered, "I don't care if they all dehydrate. They brought this on themselves." The clip was out within an hour. A teenager down the street uploaded it to TikTok with the caption, "Karen, Queen of Drymouth HOA," and it exploded overnight. Within 24 hours, the clip had racked up over 600,000 views. People in other states were duetting it, laughing at the absurdity. Dana and I watched from the couch, popcorn in hand, while commenters poured in calling Karen Cement Queen and Hydra Karen. Someone even made a meme of her face photoshopped onto a cracked faucet. The public humiliation was enough to trigger a full-blown emergency session the next day. But the board couldn't meet privately. Too many residents had demanded transparency. So, for the first time in years, they were forced to hold an open-air community meeting in the clubhouse parking lot. I brought a lawn chair and parked across the street, just far enough to observe, but not participate. Dana flew our drone in again, this time equipped with a speaker and camera, broadcasting the event to our laptop. The footage showed chaos. Dozens of residents, furious and loud, demanded answers. Thomas, one of the younger board members, stood at the front, sweating through his collared shirt. He tried to calm everyone down, but it was no use. People were livid. One woman shouted, "My toddler has had 3 sponge baths in a row." Another man yelled, "I had to use my pool skimmer to flush my toilet." Then came the calls to remove Karen. Someone brought out a petition. Over half the residents had signed already. A vote was scheduled right then and there. Karen tried to stop it. She stood on a chair and screamed about protocol and order. But it was too late. Her time was up. While all of this unfolded, I made a quiet call to Martin at the water department. I told him the neighborhood was finally moving toward resolution, and I'd be ready to negotiate the reinstatement of flow as soon as they voted. He chuckled and said, "I bet they're regretting that concrete now." I replied, "Oh, they haven't even paid for the cleanup yet. That's coming next." Sure enough, by sunset, the vote was finalized. Karen was out, removed by overwhelming majority. Her reign of cement and chaos had ended in a spectacular implosion. The remaining board, desperate to repair the damage, reached out to me the next morning. Thomas, now acting president, approached our gate sheepishly. He asked if we could meet. I agreed, on one condition, that Dana would sit in, too. We gathered around our patio table, sipping water that tasted sweeter than ever. Thomas apologized on behalf of the board. He acknowledged their mistake and begged us to lift the revocation so the city could restore water service. Dana laid out her terms. Full reimbursement for the well's repair. A formal letter of apology. And an HOA policy change preventing any future tampering with privately owned historic structures. Thomas agreed to everything. Desperation is a great motivator. We signed the reinstatement order right then and there. As I walked him to the gate, Thomas paused and said, "For what it's worth, I never liked her. I just didn't know how bad it would get." I nodded and replied, "The scary part is she thought she was right the whole time. That's what made her dangerous." By the end of the week, the water flowed again. Faucets hissed, then gushed. Lawns slowly regained their color. The HOA, once a rigid tower of enforcement, was now a humbled council eager to regain trust. But the neighborhood never forgot. And neither did Karen. Her house went on the market within days. No goodbye party. No farewell note. Just a moving truck and a bitter woman glaring out the window as she left the street she once ruled with an iron hose. The week following Karen's removal felt like living in the aftermath of a storm that had ripped through the neighborhood and left behind the kind of silence you don't quite trust. People were hesitant to celebrate. After all, just days ago they were rationing water and boiling rain in pot. But there was also something undeniably different in the air now. A sense of relief mixed with embarrassment. The same neighbors who once avoided eye contact with me at the mailbox were now stopping midwalk to say things like "You were right all along" and "Sorry we didn't speak up sooner." Dana called it the post-Karen thaw. I called it ironic justice. And while the community slowly returned to normalcy, I focused on preparing for the next chapter. Holding them accountable not just socially, but legally. Repairing the well wasn't as simple as scooping out the concrete and calling it a day. The cement had damaged the internal stone lining, choked the filtration system, and disrupted the underground channel. We'd gotten a quote from a preservation contractor, and the price tag wasn't small. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about making it clear that what Karen and the board had done wasn't just petty, it was criminal. Dana and I sat down with our attorney, a wiry man named Leonard with thick glasses and a memory like a steel trap. He reviewed everything. The photos, the footage, the city letters, and the easement document. His eyebrows lifted only once, when he got to the part where Karen labeled the sabotage as community beautification. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Well, that's the dumbest legal defense I've seen in 20 years. You've got her on property damage, environmental interference, municipal obstruction, and trespassing. And if the HOA formally approved it? Then they're co-liable." I asked if it was worth suing. He smiled. "If you're looking to make a point and cover your costs? Absolutely. If we play this right, you won't just get your well restored. You'll own the narrative and their future conduct." The civil suit was filed by the end of the week. It wasn't splashy. It was methodical. It listed every infraction by date, outlined the damage to the historical structure, and included 3 separate expert testimonies from restoration specialists. Leonard made sure the lawsuit named not just Karen, but the HOA entity itself, and that caused immediate panic. Because the HOA's insurance didn't cover malicious acts or actions performed outside of lawful board vote. The remaining members scrambled. Some pleaded ignorance, others begged to be removed as defendant. A few turned on Karen instantly, digging up old emails and texts where she boasted about her cement solution and mocked us for being country hillbillies with a glorified puddle. The evidence kept piling higher, and Leonard barely had to do any digging. They were handing us the nails for their own coffin. Meanwhile, public attention hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown. The viral video of Karen's hot mic moment was picked up by a regional news station and aired in a special segment called "When HOAs Go Too Far." They interviewed me briefly, mostly about the history of the well and how the HOA had bulldozed its legal boundaries. I stayed calm, professional, even gracious, but they also interviewed neighbors, and some of their responses weren't as filtered. One elderly man shook his head and said, "That woman poured cement into a piece of history. What kind of person does that?" Another neighbor added, "It's not about water anymore. It's about respect. They disrespected all of us." Within 2 days, the HOA board called an emergency meeting, not to plan repairs but to discuss the mounting legal fees. They were terrified. Insurance premiums skyrocketed. Contractors refused to work with them. And a number of homeowners threatened to sue the HOA themselves if dues were raised to pay for Karen's mistake. Dana and I sat in on the meeting, not as members but as guests. The room was tense. You could feel the shame hanging in the air like humidity before a thunderstorm. Thomas stood at the front, pale and exhausted, trying to keep order. He opened the floor for public comment, and that's when everything unraveled. One woman, the same neighbor who'd put the "I support water rights" sign on her mailbox, stood and addressed the board directly. I want to know why our dues should go toward fixing something we didn't vote for. You let Karen run wild, and now you want us to pay for it? Another resident followed, demanding to see the vote record for the well sabotage. Turns out there wasn't one. Karen had acted unilaterally, claiming board support that never existed. She even forged 2 digital signatures on an internal document to justify the cement truck order. The gasp that rippled through the room was louder than anything spoken. I stood up then, not to gloat but to clarify. For what it's worth, Dana and I didn't file this lawsuit to punish the community. We filed it to make sure this never happens again. We wanted to protect something old and meaningful. Instead, we had to protect ourselves. If the board wants to settle, we're open to negotiation. But the apology? That has to be public. And it has to be real. They didn't argue. By the end of that meeting, the HOA had agreed to a full settlement, complete funding for the restoration, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and a restructured board code requiring unanimous approval for any future property interference. Karen, meanwhile, was nowhere to be found. Rumors said she'd moved to her sister's place across the state. One person claimed she was trying to start a new HOA. Another said she'd gone off the grid entirely. I didn't care. She was out of our lives. Her legacy, however, was sealed in every broken sprinkler and dry faucet left in her wake. A few days later, a crew arrived to begin removing the concrete from the well. It took almost a week. They used specialized tools, 1 layer at a time, preserving the surrounding stonework. As the final chunk was lifted out, I watched from a lawn chair with a cold drink in my hand. Dana snapped a photo, one of those rare moments where peace returned to a place that had seen so much chaos. The restoration team applauded when clean water trickled up again, slow but steady, proof that nature was more patient than any HOA president. The city even offered to place a protective marker near the well, registered historic water source. Any tampering subject to prosecution. I said yes without hesitation. They installed a small sign, brass and understated, beside a stone path leading to the well. Kids from the local school came to tour it. Teachers asked if they could use it as part of the town's history curriculum. I agreed, smiling. Let the next generation learn how quickly good things can be destroyed, and how hard they are to rebuild. That weekend, we hosted a small gathering. Not a party, just neighbors coming together. No HOA oversight, no official approvals. People brought food, folding chairs, and stories. It was the first time in months that I'd seen real smiles. Not polite nods or neighborly obligations. Actual, human gratitude. One couple brought a bottle of wine with a note that read, "Thanks for holding the line when the rest of us didn't know how." Dana teared up reading it. I didn't blame her. As the evening wound down and the fire pit crackled behind us, someone asked if we'd ever considered joining the HOA board ourselves. Dana laughed. I chuckled and said, "We're not interested in running anything. We just want to live in peace." That got a few nods. Then someone else asked, "Do you think Karen will ever come back?" I thought for a moment, then said, "Probably not. But if she does, at least now, we've got a sign that says she can't pour cement over the truth and get away with it." They all laughed. But I wasn't joking. Because in this neighborhood, water wasn't just life. It had become the great equalizer. And thanks to one very misguided HOA president, the entire community had finally learned that some things, like history and rights, can't be buried in concrete forever. Summer turned to fall with a breeze that no longer carried tension. The once divided neighborhood now felt like a place of cautious unity, like a house patched up after a storm. There were still a few cracks beneath the surface, whispers of former loyalties, a fence or two still bearing the signs of Karen's era, but overall, people had learned. They had seen what unchecked power could do and how far one person's obsession with control could spiral into disaster. For the first time since we moved in, our neighborhood wasn't just peaceful. It was cooperative. People waved more often, kids played in front yards again, and Dana and I could enjoy a quiet evening on the porch without wondering if a drone, a complaint, or a confrontation was coming. The well restoration finished ahead of schedule. The team managed to preserve most of the original structure, and the new system they installed beneath the surface ensured that the water flow was more reliable than ever. A low, rust-colored pump handle had been restored to match the original 1880s design. It wasn't just functional, it was symbolic. A reminder that despite Karen's best efforts to bury something meaningful, it had survived and returned even stronger. The city even scheduled a small dedication ceremony, and to our surprise, people actually came. Neighbors showed up, some bringing kids, others just curious. The mayor gave a short speech, awkward and polite, followed by one from a local historian who called our well a resurrected artery of independence. Dana looked over at me during that and whispered, "I still prefer puddle with a pulley." I grinned and nodded. We stood beside the newly restored well, shaking hands with people we'd once barely exchanged glances with. Some of them apologized quietly, embarrassed they hadn't stood up to Karen sooner. Others admitted they didn't fully understand what was going on until the water dried up. One man even laughed and said, "Who knew that the guy with the ugly bucket would turn out to be the neighborhood's firewall?" It felt strange being thanked so often, especially for something that never should have needed defending in the first place. But if that was the cost of waking people up, it was worth it. As for the lawsuit, the settlement came through just a week after the dedication. It arrived as a thick packet in the mail, signed and sealed. The HOA had formally agreed to pay for the entire restoration, legal costs, and a small additional sum for damages. We didn't push for more than that. We weren't in it for profit. The key clause, however, was the one Dana fought for, a permanent amendment to the HOA bylaws that stated no member, officer, or committee could interfere with historically zoned private property under threat of personal legal liability. That clause would outlast any presidency. It was a long-term win. The city even refunded our legal filing fees, citing the public interest of the case. Apparently, we'd unintentionally become a textbook example of civic pushback. A local civics teacher reached out and asked if he could use our story for a module on property right. Dana laughed when she read that email and said, "So we're officially a cautionary tale now." I replied, "We're pioneers. Pioneers with a fence and a valve." Karen, on the other hand, had vanished. Rumor had it she moved in with her sister 3 towns over, but no one knew for sure. Her house was purchased quickly and quietly by a couple from out of state. They repainted the front, pulled up the hydrangeas she once worshipped, and removed all the security cameras she'd installed. The place almost looked normal again. A few neighbors told them the story of what happened, just to make sure they understood the history. One of them, upon hearing the whole saga, walked over to our place with a 6-pack and said, "If anything weird ever happens again, I'll assume you already have the blueprint to fix it." Despite the legal resolution, there were still smaller fires to put out. A few of Karen's loyalists, those who once parroted her HOA newsletters like scripture, tried to maintain their authority in small ways. Passive-aggressive notes on trash bins. Sidewalk chalk complaints. One even mumbled something about our solar panels being too reflective. But those voices were quieter now, drowned out by the majority who had seen the damage Karen's methods caused. The new board members, especially Thomas, were far more grounded. He stopped by occasionally, always respectful, and made it clear he wanted a clean break from the past. He even asked Dana to review a few upcoming zoning policies to make sure there wouldn't be another cement incident. She did, with red ink and a dry sense of humor. One particular moment sealed everything. About 2 months after the settlement, I was in the backyard adjusting the hose when I noticed a group of kids huddled around the well. Normally, I might have been cautious, but they weren't doing any harm. In fact, one of them was explaining the history to the others. He pointed to the brass plaque and said, "That's the sign that keeps bad grown-ups from messing with it again. It's like a spell." The others nodded solemnly. I didn't interrupt. I just stood back and smiled. They got it. Life settled into something stable after that. Dana took on a consulting project with the city, helping to review neighborhood development plans. I started gardening more, finally planting the tomatoes I'd been putting off all year. We still got the occasional media request, especially when someone new discovered the viral video or wanted to do a follow-up. We turned most of them down. The story had been told. The message was out. We didn't need to retell it. We just wanted to live our lives without anyone trespassing on our land with a cement truck. It wasn't about water anymore. It never really was. It was about control, about boundaries, about people like Karen who believed power came from paper titles and clipboard rules. What she never understood was that the strongest power isn't control. It's ownership of land, of truth, of one's rights. She underestimated us because we were quiet. Because we didn't shout at HOA meetings or parade around with flags. But when she poured that cement, she didn't just damage a well. She activated the silent force of two people who believed in law, community, and fairness. And when the pressure built up, it was her pipes that burst. Sometimes at night, I'd sit on the porch and look at the old well in the moonlight. It stood there like a monument, not just to water, but to resilience. Dana would come out, sit beside me, and say, "Think the HOAs learned their lesson?" I'd answer, "Probably. But if not, we still have the valve." That always made her smile. And that's how it ended. Not with a dramatic final battle or some viral stunt, but with quiet dignity and restored peace. Our water flowed freely, our neighborhood found its footing, and the people who once blindly followed learned to think for themselves. No more cement trucks. No more unauthorized action. Just a well, a couple who refused to back down, and a street that finally remembered what it meant to be neighbors. In the end, all it took was one disastrous mistake from an overreaching HOA president to remind an entire community that sometimes, the smallest things, like a patch of earth with an old crank handle, can hold the greatest power. And sometimes, the people who look the quietest are the ones who write the next chapter. Not with concrete, but with conviction.